In the depths of the Oregon forest, where ancient trees whisper secrets to the wind, two friends embarked on what they thought would be a peaceful weekend getaway. The year was 1997, and the allure of a secluded hunting cabin nestled among the towering pines proved irresistible. Little did they know that their retreat would become a nightmare that would haunt them for years to come. As night fell on their first evening, the friends settled in, the crackling fire casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. The forest outside was eerily silent, save for the occasional hoot of a distant owl. But at precisely 1:14 a.m., a sound pierced the stillness. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling the cabin. At first they tried to dismiss it as their imagination playing tricks on them. Perhaps it was just the wind or a curious animal investigating their presence. But as the footsteps continued, growing louder and more distinct with each passing moment, a chill ran down their spines. Gathering their courage, they decided to investigate. Flashlights in hand, they cautiously opened the cabin door, the hinges creaking ominously in the night air. Fresh snow had blanketed the ground, transforming the forest into a winter wonderland. But what they saw next defied all logic and reason. There, etched in the pristine snow, was a perfect circle of footprints surrounding the cabin. The tracks were deep and clear, as if made by a heavy boot, but something was terribly wrong. The footprints had no beginning and no end. They simply formed an unbroken loop around the structure, as if their creator had materialized out of thin air and vanished just as mysteriously. The friends spent the rest of the night huddled together, wide awake and trembling, their minds racing with possibilities. Who or what had made those footprints? And why had they circled the cabin with such eerie precision? As dawn broke, they hoped that the light of day would bring some rational explanation. But the footprints remained, a silent testament to the inexplicable events of the night before. They debated leaving, cutting their trip short, but a mix of curiosity and stubbornness compelled them to stay. Surely, they reasoned, there had to be a logical explanation. The second night fell, and with it came a sense of foreboding that settled over the cabin like a heavy fog. The friends tried to distract themselves with card games and conversation, but their eyes kept darting to the windows, searching the darkness beyond. At exactly 1:14 a.m., right on cue, the footsteps returned. This time, however, something had changed. Instead of circling endlessly, they approached the cabin with slow, measured steps. The friends held their breath, hearts pounding in their chests as the footsteps drew nearer and nearer. And then they stopped. Directly beneath the bedroom window, for what seemed like an eternity, silence reigned. The friends stared at each other, frozen in fear, neither daring to move or speak. What would happen next? Would their unseen visitor try to enter the cabin? Or was it waiting for them to investigate, to step outside into the darkness? Just as the tension became unbearable, the footsteps resumed. But this time, they were moving away from the cabin, fading into the depths of the forest, until they could no longer be heard. When morning came, the friends packed their bags with shaking hands and fled the cabin, their weekend getaway cut short by terror. As they drove through the nearest town, they couldn't help but share their story with a few locals at a small diner. The reaction they received was not what they expected. Instead of disbelief or skepticism, they were met with knowing looks and hushed whispers. An elderly man, his face weathered by years in the wilderness, approached their table. "You stayed in the old Henderson cabin, didn't you?" he asked, his voice gravelly and low. When they nodded, he sighed heavily and pulled up a chair. "There's a story about those woods," he began, "one that goes back years. A man went missing up there, back in the 70s. Search parties combed the area for weeks, but they never found a trace of him. Some say he got lost. Others think it was something more, ... unnatural." The friends leaned in, captivated by the old man's tale. "But here's the thing," he continued, his eyes darting around as if afraid of being overheard. "Some folks around here believe he never really left. They say his spirit still walks those forests, searching for a way home. And every now and then, someone like you comes along and hears those footsteps. As the friends drove home, they couldn't shake the old man's words from their minds. Had they truly encountered the restless spirit of a lost soul? Or was there some other explanation for the mysterious footprints and the rhythmic nightly visitations? In the years that followed, they would often reflect on that fateful weekend in the Oregon woods. They would tell their story to skeptical friends, to paranormal investigators, to anyone who would listen. But no matter how many times they recounted the tale, one chilling detail always stood out. Every night, the footsteps circled the cabin, but they never led anywhere. The mystery of the disappearing footsteps in the Oregon forest remains unsolved to this day. Some dismiss it as an elaborate hoax or a case of overactive imaginations fueled by isolation and darkness. Others point to it as evidence of the supernatural, a glimpse into a world beyond our understanding. But for those two friends, the memory of those nights in the cabin will forever be etched in their minds. As clear and undeniable as those perfect footprints in the snow, they learned firsthand that sometimes the most terrifying stories are not those of monsters or violence, but of the inexplicable, the moments when reality itself seems to bend and break, leaving us to question everything we thought we knew. And so, the legend of the disappearing footsteps lives on, whispered around campfires and shared in hushed tones. It serves as a reminder that even in our modern world of science and reason, there are still dark corners of the wilderness where mystery reigns supreme. It beckons to the curious and the brave, daring them to venture into the unknown and perhaps, if they're not careful, to leave their own set of footprints in the annals of local lore. For those who hear this tale and feel a shiver run down their spine, a word of caution. The next time you find yourself in a secluded cabin, surrounded by the vast expanse of nature, listen carefully as the clock strikes 1:14 a.m. You never know what sounds might drift in from the darkness or what unseen visitor might be circling your temporary refuge, searching for something or someone long lost to time. In the end, the story of the disappearing footsteps reminds us that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, some questions left unanswered. It challenges us to embrace the unknown, to acknowledge that there are forces at work in this world that defy explanation. And perhaps, in doing so, we open ourselves up to the possibility of experiences that transcend the boundaries of our everyday reality. So the next time you hear an unexplained sound in the night or catch a glimpse of something just beyond the edge of your vision, remember the tale of the Oregon forest and the friends who dared to stay in that lonely cabin. 4. In the realm of the supernatural, sometimes the most terrifying truths are those that leave no trace, save for the indelible mark they leave upon our souls. The cabin had one locked door, and they made the mistake of opening it. In the remote wilderness of Alberta, Canada, a young couple's weekend getaway turned into a nightmare that would haunt them for years to come. It was the summer of 2003 when Sarah and Mike decided to escape the hustle and bustle of city life, accepting their friend's generous offer to stay at his secluded cabin deep in the woods. As they arrived at the rustic retreat, the friend handed them the keys with an unusual warning. "Whatever you do, don't open the small room at the back. It's padlocked for a reason." The couple exchanged curious glances but nodded in agreement, eager to start their peaceful vacation. The first day passed uneventfully, filled with hikes through the lush forest and quiet evenings by the fireplace. But as night fell on the second day, an unsettling change crept over the cabin. Sarah was the first to notice it, a faint rhythmic scratching coming from somewhere in the house. At first, she dismissed it as the wind, or perhaps a branch scraping against the roof. But as the hours ticked by, the sound grew more distinct, accompanied by what sounded like whispers, barely audible yet unmistakably human. Mike, ever the skeptic, tried to reassure his increasingly anxious girlfriend. "It's probably just the old cabin settling," he said with forced confidence. But as they lay in bed that night, both wide awake and listening intently, they realized the sounds were coming from a specific location, the locked room their friend had warned them about. "What if it's an animal trapped in there?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "We can't just leave it suffering." Mike hesitated, torn between his concern for a potentially injured creature and the nagging memory of their friend's warning. In the end, curiosity and compassion won out over caution. With trembling hands, Mike approached the padlocked door, bolt cutters in hand. The metal lock fell away with a dull thud, and for a moment the couple stood frozen, listening. The scratching had stopped. Slowly, Mike pushed the door open, revealing a sight that defied explanation. The room was completely empty. No furniture, no windows, nothing but bare walls and a wooden floor. But what made their blood run cold were the walls themselves. Every inch of the surface was covered in deep, frantic claw marks, as if something had been desperately trying to escape. The marks ran from floor to ceiling, some so deep they had gouged into the very structure of the wall. Sarah stumbled backward, her hand clasped over her mouth to stifle a scream. Mike stood rooted to the spot, his mind racing to find a logical explanation for what they were seeing. But there was no rationalization that could account for the sheer horror of that empty room, bearing the scars of some unimaginable struggle. They slammed the door shut and retreated to their bedroom, locking themselves in and pushing a heavy dresser against the door for good measure. Sleep was impossible as they huddled together, jumping at every creak and groan of the old cabin. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, they thought the worst was behind them. But then, just as they were considering making a run for their car, it started again, the scratching. Only this time it wasn't coming from the locked room. It was coming from inside their bedroom walls. The sound was unmistakable, desperate, frenzied clawing, as if something was trying to tear its way through the very structure of the house to reach them. And with the scratching came the whispers, louder now, a cacophony of indistinct voices that seemed to be calling their names. Panic overtook them. They grabbed what they could and fled the cabin, not even bothering to lock up behind them. As they sped down the dirt road, tires kicking up clouds of dust, Sarah glanced back one last time. For a split second, she thought she saw a figure standing in the upstairs window, a dark, misshapen silhouette that seemed to be watching them leave. They never returned to the cabin, and their friend was bewildered by their frantic, incoherent explanation of what had happened. He swore he had no idea about the scratched walls or any strange occurrences in the house. The room, he claimed, had always been empty, a storage space he never used. Years passed, but Sarah and Mike could never shake the memory of that night. They would wake up in cold sweats, imagining they heard scratching in their walls. Every locked door became a source of dread, a potential gateway to something unimaginable. The true nature of what happened in that Alberta cabin remains a mystery. Some speculate about restless spirits, others about interdimensional beings. But for Sarah and Mike, the specifics didn't matter. They had learned a terrifying lesson about the dangers of curiosity and the wisdom of heeding warnings. To this day, deep in the Alberta wilderness, that cabin still stands. And if you listen closely on a quiet night, some say you can still hear the faint sound of scratching coming from a room that should never be opened. The locked door remains a chilling reminder that some secrets are better left undisturbed, and that in the darkest corners of our world, there are horrors beyond human comprehension, waiting for someone to make the fatal mistake of letting them out.
The story I'm going to tell you today is scary, mysterious, maybe even a bit creepy. It's a true story about something that happened to a good friend of mine who some of you may know. She's an author, and in 2015, she rented a small cabin deep in the forests of northern Sweden. The location is just north of the Arctic Circle, a very remote part of the world. She wanted to spend a week there alone, away from distractions, working on her latest novel. All was going well until the second evening when she noticed a tall figure standing at the tree line facing her cabin. Now, this particular cabin is pretty isolated. There are no other cabins nearby. There are no roads or tracks leading to it. And it's surrounded by dense forest on all sides. Access to it is via a narrow dirt road that runs from the main highway about 3 kilometers before it disappears into the trees. My friend reached the cabin by car, and then once there, she parked the car and walked the rest of the way to the cabin. There are no hiking trails in the area, so if anyone was coming to visit, they would have to be doing it on foot and they would have to cross private property. As I said, all was well until the second evening, when suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, my friend saw a tall figure standing at the edge of the trees looking towards the cabin. At first, she didn't give it much thought. She assumed it was a hiker who must have been passing by through the forest and decided to camp for the night. But every time she glanced back, she noticed that the man had moved slightly closer. By the time she went to bed, he was still there. And every time she looked out the window, he was standing a little closer. At first, she tried not to let it bother her, but as midnight approached, she started to get freaked out. Then, just after midnight, she heard what sounded like footsteps crunching on the gravel outside her cabin. She looked out the window and saw that the man had moved yet again, but this time he was only a few feet from the cabin wall. And it was at this point that my friend did something that she instantly regretted. She opened the front door to check it out. Now, I should point out that my friend is a big, strong woman. A true Swede. She stands almost 6 feet tall and has hands like a blacksmith. Despite this, when she opened the door and stepped out into the darkness, she couldn't help but feel a surge of adrenaline. She shouted into the darkness and even switched on the beam from her mobile phone, sweeping it back and forth. But despite the light from the phone, she could see no one. The area around the cabin was completely deserted. In the morning, after, of course, not sleeping a wink, she went out the front door to find huge boot prints in the snow that circled the cabin again and again. But there were no footprints leading up to the cabin or away from it. They were completely baffled. So now we need your help. What do you think happened here? Was it a stalker? A ghost? A troll? Or something else entirely? Let me know in the comments below. Here's what my friend did next. After finding the strange footprints, she decided to leave and head back to the city. She locked up the cabin and headed down the dirt road towards her car. As she walked, she continued to look out for any sign of life, but there was nothing. When she got to her car, she got in and drove off. She stopped about 200 meters down the road to check her tires, and when she noticed that 2 of them were flat. She managed to change the tires and get going again. But the experience left her shaken. As she drove the remaining distance to the highway, she kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone running along the road behind her, or maybe even standing in the middle of it waving their arms. But of course, she saw no one. Once on the highway, she drove as fast as she could until she reached the nearest town. There, she stopped, bought some food, and then made her way to the airport and caught a plane back home. Naturally, she told her family and friends what had happened, but they all thought she was making it up. So she contacted the police to see if they had any record of strange activity in the area. It turned out that they did. About a month earlier, a woman had reported seeing a strange man near her cabin at night. 2, he'd also appeared to be watching her. She had called the police, but when they arrived, the man was gone, and no trace of him could be found. So with 2 similar incidents having occurred within a month of each other, the police began investigating. They searched the surrounding forests, but they didn't find anything unusual. They even brought in sniffer dogs, but these failed to pick up any human scent. They suggested that perhaps the whole thing had been a figment of my friend's imagination, that she had somehow subconsciously created this entire scenario in her mind. But how could that be? And I ask you again, what do you think happened here? Let me know in the comments below. Okay, so several weeks after the incident, my friend decided to go back to the cabin. She wanted to see for herself if there had been any more signs of the mystery man. When she arrived, she found more strange footprints in the snow, same as before. But this time, she also noticed something else. Someone had apparently tried to break in through the back door, but they hadn't done a very good job of it. The door was old and solid wood, and the lock was sturdy. Whoever had tried to force their way in had clearly not been able to. Fearing that she might not be alone, she quickly got in her car and drove back to town. But once there, she relaxed a bit and decided to call the police again. This time, though, she asked them to keep a close watch on the cabin. To this day, no one knows who the man was or why he was watching my friend's cabin. The police never found any trace of him, and neither they nor anyone else could come up with a viable explanation. I think it's safe to say that my friend was spooked by the whole ordeal. For a long time afterwards, she avoided going back to the cabin, even during the day. It wasn't until recently that she finally worked up the courage to go back. She told me that she hasn't seen the man or found any more footprints, but she can't help but keep an eye on the trees. Whenever she's there, half expecting to see him emerge from the woods and start walking towards her cabin. Maybe he's harmless. Maybe he's just lonely. Or maybe he's dangerous and was sizing her up as a potential victim. That last thought still keeps her up at night. And that's the end of this episode. If you enjoyed the story, please remember to leave me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel to hear more creepy stories. Thanks for listening!